Hello and welcome to the 24/7 video blog. I'm Tsvetelina, Managing Director of 24/7, an anti-trafficking human rights organization. In this video, we're going to discuss the economics of human trafficking. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share to spread the word. In 1850, a slave could be purchased for a global weighted average of between 9,500 and 11,000 US dollars. This figure is adjusted for inflation. That slave generated roughly 15 to 20% an annual return of investment. Today, slaves sell for a global weighted average of $420 and can generate 300 to 500% more in annual return on investment, especially if trafficked into sexual slavery. When I say slaves, I'm specifically speaking about individuals who are victims of what we know as human trafficking. Human trafficking has become an industry that spans the world, energized by the power of globalization. It targets vulnerable populations affected by war, poverty, and oppression. Although condemned internationally and illegal in almost every country in the world, there is still an estimated 35.9 million people in slavery today. Children represent an estimated 26% of all forced labor victims. Those victims generate an estimated revenue of 150 billion annually, 99 billion which is solely from sex trafficking. In this video, we will discuss how this horrific act has continued to not only survive but thrive as an immensely profitable international legal business. In order to understand the economics of trafficking, you must first understand the reason it exists and continues to thrive. The reason why sex trafficking persists is straightforward: immense profitability with a minimal risk. A net profit margin of over 70% makes sex trafficking one of the most profitable businesses in the world. It's becoming increasingly easy and inexpensive to procure more and exploit vulnerable women and children. This is true of all forms of forced labor: high profits, low risk. The demand for cheap labor or sex in order to accrue high profits is what keeps the economics machine of human trafficking running, matching the supply and demand with the little risk of a criminal prosecution. This makes human trafficking a lucrative business to enter. The economics threshold of entry into trafficking industry is very low, with the average global cost of a human being about $400 and the annual return 1,000 times that. It's easy to see how the buying and selling of human beings has continued and thrived in the 20th and 21st century. While data on the prevalence of human trafficking in the United States is rare due to the covert nature of the crime, some research suggests that trafficking profits are staggering. A report from the International Labour Office 2014 estimates annual profit generated per sex trafficking victims were greater than 200,000. We'll examine this figure later and show the mathematics behind those profits. With regard to any type of trade, whether it be legal or illicit, certain factors always affect profitability. The same is true with sex trafficking. Cost is determined by supply and demand as well as risk and reward. All those factors have varying influences on sex trafficking success and profitability, or hopefully someday, if you all work together, its failure. Let's start by understanding the supply of victims to traffickers. Keep in mind, victims are forced, coerced, tricked, or abused into the situation. They are an unwilling supply, although sometimes they do not realize this. In an article by author and activist Siddharth Kara in the International Harvard Review, Mr. Kara discussed the role supply-side economics play in the perpetuating human trafficking. He writes, the supply of contemporary trafficked slaves is promoted by long-standing factors such as poverty, lawlessness, social instability, military conflict, environmental disaster, corruption, and acute bias against the female gender and minority ethnicities. Those elements provide a mass number of vulnerable populations ripe for the picking by traffickers, and migrating populations are among the most vulnerable to human trafficking. As individuals migrate from one country to another, or within a country, they become a more vulnerable target for traffickers, especially if from or within a transitioning state. One of the best examples I can think of for the conditions just described, and one I have personal experience with it is the collapse of the Soviet Union and surrounding states. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the economy in the Soviet bloc was devastated. New economic policies failed, leaving a vacuum of power allowing criminals organizations to thrive. Unemployment was high, those with jobs were paid very low wages. Women were taken advantage of as they migrated to new countries to find jobs. In some cases, a woman would apply for unskilled labor position in another country through a company that offered to cover the cost of her visa and travel. When she arrived in the country, her passport was taken, she didn't speak the local language, and she was forced into bonded labor. As the former Soviet bloc countries joined the EU, the lack of border checks gave traffickers the ability to transport victims from post-communist countries to industrial Western countries without encumbrance. The economic condition Mr. Kara eloquently addresses is the same factors which led to my victimization, and this is the reason my organization 24/7 created patented method to deliver information to victims in transit. A study by the Polaris Project in 2015 found that many victims turned to traffickers due to sustained unemployment, unpaid debt, and desperation to provide for themselves and their children. The conditions in the post-Soviet economy are still ripe with unemployment, debt, and desperation. Many organizations and governments have worked hard to decrease the supply of victims of human trafficking. Those organizations work with local law enforcement to protect the rights of the poor and vulnerable. They try to provide the poor with other job opportunities that keeps them from the vulnerabilities of poverty. They try to educate people about the darkness of human trafficking. Nevertheless, it still continues throughout the world in places like Bulgaria, Romania, or even on the South American, African, and Asian continents. Political corruption, poverty, and criminal violence keep conditions of instability, allowing for readily available supply of victims. While the supply of people is an important element in the continuation of forced labor and sex trafficking, demand is what really drives the modern slave trade. Uniquely, human trafficking is the only industry where the supply and demand are for the same commodity. They both desire the commodity of human beings. High demand for forced labor and sex exists for various reasons. Although sex trafficking is not new, its resurgence in the demand might be attributed to commercialization of sex through television, internet, and other forms of technology. There are, for example, websites that exist specifically to promote sexual exploitation of women and youths. Those websites promote the buying and selling of sex both locally and across the borders. Common discussion topics of the website includes negotiation of sexual activity with the girl or directly with her pimp, the price, performance rating, local criminal and police activity, and general navigation for sex tourists in new areas. In countries where prostitution is illegal, it's not uncommon to find internet lists identifying where to find massage parlors doubling as brothels. The lists detail how to negotiate more than just a happy ending at those establishments, sometimes listing the price of each sex act the supposed massager will do. Demand for sex trafficking will continue to grow due to the commercialization of sex and our cultural acceptance that has transactionalized the sex experience through the internet and other media. Another reason why demand is able to stay at current levels is because there are little to no risks deterring traffickers from selling and purchasing trafficked persons. Conviction rates show that the risk of human trafficking are lower than the risk of trafficking illegal drugs or arms. For example, with only a few hundred federal prosecutions since January 2001, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act has had little impact on human trafficking in the United States, and beyond those identified, arrested, and prosecuted, much trafficking goes unrecognized. The Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act and allowed states and victims to fight online sex trafficking act were both created to fight eliminating traffickers from providing a venue to meet the demand established through the internet. The acts have made headway into stopping some trafficking on a website such as a Backpage, but there are still many venues online traffickers are utilizing to force victims into sex acts. Economically, we know that the supply always responds to the demand. So, if we want the supply to go away, then we have to take action to remove the demand. As any business, there are both costs and profits associated with trafficking. Many traffickers try to pass some of those costs off to their victims, thereby creating a form of debt bondage and increasing the trafficker's control over the victims. A trafficker's cost in maintaining a stable of girls is varied. According to a study done by the Urban Institute, the largest expense for the trafficker is housing, following very closely by clothing and beauty treatments for the girls, advertisements, hotel rooms, cell phones, legal fees, securities, and drugs or alcohol are next most common expenses. Additional costs such as food, condoms, and weapons are incurred but are usually small enough to be negligible in the trafficker's mind. The movement of girls to various markets relentless and investment a trafficker might make. For example, a trafficker might choose to move girls to major sporting events such as the Super Bowl or World Cup. This increases their cost but may also increase profits due to the increased demand. More demand means the trafficker can charge higher prices. With all those costs, one might wonder why trafficking is so lucrative. There are two main answers. The first is a human commodity can be resold countless times. Depending upon the demand, sometimes the commodity can be resold several times in just few hours. A good example would be a major sporting event where the fulfillment of demand means some trafficked women service 3 or 4 an hour. The second reason is capacity of scale. Most traffickers have more than one girl. The term stables is often used to describe the amount of women working for a pimp or trafficker. The math is actually very simple, and it depends upon the amount of women trafficked by the pimp, the amount of Johns the girls are forced to visit per week. Let's see. If you consider a trafficker runs 5 girls, who each service 10 men a night, 6 days a week, at $100 per encounter, the gross income is $30,000. This amount can be easily adjusted by adding a girl, having them work 7 days a week, having them service more men, or even raising the price. Price is determined by free market rates. Pimps charge different amounts depending upon the girl, and some cities are more expensive than others. For example, as per Urban Institute study, a prostitute is more expensive in Miami than it is in Dallas. As per the same study conducted by the Urban Institute, Atlanta is the city which traffickers make the most money, averaging over $30,000 a week. Keep in mind, a trafficked woman never sees any of those money. In fact, the trafficker often charges her for his cost. Things such as housing, food, and transportation are billed back to the girl by the trafficker. But what about the human cost? In this blog, we have talked a lot of monetary costs, but what are the costs of human trafficking? The human cost, the cost known to the victim. As a survivor, I can tell you the cost to the victim is immeasurable. The cost of human trafficking to victims is significant and often lifelong. Victims often experience wage theft, suffer substantial economic costs due to the physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, and due to a lack of legal work histories face diminished economic opportunity. In addition, because commercial sex is illegal in most of the United States, many sex trafficking victims become involved with the justice system and are criminalized despite laws protecting victims. As per U.S. Department of Health, victims of sex trafficking often experience poor physical and mental health. Sex trafficking victims are at high risk of sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy, unsafe abortions. Physical health problems reported by victims of trafficking often include headaches, stomach pain, back pain, mental health problems which are often severe, including depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other psychiatric conditions. Due to the difficulty of rejoining society, victims have also committed suicides. I hope this blog helps reveal a huge increase in intense exploitation of individuals, especially that of the sex trafficked women. Its mission. The instability of the world has led fast pool of available victims. The commercialization of sex through technology has made it easier for traffickers to advertise and deliver their products anywhere, anytime. The prosecution of traffickers is difficult, and penalties are often lax. Therefore, if there are few to no consequences for the perpetrators of human trafficking, how can we expect the demand for trafficked individuals to decrease, especially given the enormous amounts of profits that generated through sex trafficking? If you enjoyed this video, please like and share or donate.